well, what is up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 50 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the bright, sunny, fun James Gunn Superman, to my dark, gritty Zack Snyder Superman, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Not too much, Daniel. As long as I can be Superman, I won't be begging which version. As long as I've got laser eyes and can fly.
It still matches the symbols on your underpants, so you were good with that. But in honor of superheroes, because superheroes they're powerful on their own, but they are more powerful when they got their own Justice League or Avengers or whatever you want to group you want to call it. So we are not a duo, we are a trio. And joining us in our Hall of Justice today is Mr. Joseph Holmes. He is a culture critic for Religion Unplugged, a podcaster for the Overthinkers podcast, a filmmaker, among other things, an all-around good guy, and I think most importantly, a friend of the show. Welcome, Joseph. Welcome back to the show to talk a little bit about superheroes.
Very cool. Well, if you, Daniel, are the Zack Snyder Superman and Sam, you are the James Gunn Superman, then as long as I can be the Chris Reeve Superman and not the Brandon Routh Superman, I'm cool.
There you go.
I've noticed no one's claiming the... Oh, wait, I'm thinking Batman. I'm thinking cheesy Batman movies, not cheesy Superman movies. But yeah, this is, I mean, and there's a reason why I keep thinking Batman, I think. I have Batman on my mind, and that is because culture is all about Batman. And Superman has been oddly kind of left in the, as a relic of the past. So I don't know, Joseph, if you've ever thought or realized this. This is like a wild stat that I keep coming back to. And that is, since 2008, go back to the year 2008, since then, there have actually been more actors win an Oscar for playing the Joker character, Batman's arch rival, than there have been mainland Superman movies. So not only do we not have many Superman movies, and we have more Batman movies, but even Batman's arch rival villains are getting more attention in culture and acclaim than Superman. Which is just a bizarre thing. So in honor of the new Superman movie, which is coming out this week, I thought we would do a Superman-centric episode, and I thought we'd pull in Joseph, because I know Joseph, you're a Superman guy, right? Like you're a bit more plugged into were you like a big comic geek growing up?
Oh, obnoxiously so. Yes. I had, my parents tell this story. I don't remember this, but when I was just like a little tyke, like a little 2-year-old, they would try to show me a bunch of different toys and different things that I could possibly be interested in, like trucks or dinosaurs or whatever. And immediately I gravitated towards superheroes, and I just really haven't ever stopped. And so, yeah, definitely a huge superhero guy. And since I was actually in my teens, I've really gravitated towards Superman. Again, I was really interested in Spider-Man as a kid, but then as a teenager, for some reason, when everybody else was stopping liking Superman and started liking Batman, I became the Superman guy. And of course, like you said, there's often this desert of being a Superman fan. I mean, Batman has had 5 reboots, and everyone loves those movies. And then Superman keeps getting rebooted, and they're all okay, these are fine. So it's definitely a harder life being a Superman fan sometimes, but I always stick by my man.
Well,
Which is great.
Sounds like it was genetic then for you.
Yes, exactly. Nature versus nurture, which is a very Superman question.
Yeah.
And it's crazy too, because to me, if you were sort of go walk around creep people on the streets and just ask them name a superhero, I feel like Superman's still the guy. He's the ideal, the archetype of a superhero. And yet, as far as in the last couple of decades, there just hasn't been, it's not cool to be Superman anymore. It's we're all about Batman or anti-heroes, or even just bizarre, fourth string Marvel heroes, and let's make a movie about these second tier villains and focus on them. And it's we've sort of moved beyond Superman, because this is, as far as I know, unless there's some off-brand super or animated like the first sort of main Superman movie since 2013's Man of Steel. Obviously, Superman has been in other movies like Justice League, and but as far as like a movie that has like Superman in the title, it's been over a decade. So I thought we'd kind of get into it. And like I said, Bart Joseph on the show, one, because he knows a lot about superheroes. And I know that you were really excited. You've been excited for this James Gunn movie. You've been like, hyping this thing up since like it was announced, on social media and, getting amped up for it. And you have actually seen the movie. So you had an earlier screening to this. So you have seen it. I have not seen this movie until tomorrow. So I won't have, I don't know if the movie is good or not, but because you have seen it, I thought we'd sort of pick your brains and just have a general conversation about sort of the bigger question of like kind of who is Superman today? Like how does Superman, like why have we sort of moved beyond him? Why, does Superman fit into today's culture? And if he does, how does he do it? And there's been some interesting, online controversies and conversations and quotes from director James Gunn about, the political side. And this is a whole conversation about Superman. But before we kind of get into the wider conversation, I did want to get your just initial thoughts, Joseph, on this film. Because as someone that's been hyped up for this film, hoping for the best, did this film deliver, or are you feeling a bit let down?
It was all right.
Oh,
yeah, it's definitely. I mean, God, honestly, like the casting is great, the vibe is great. I'm a fan of James Gunn as a director. I'm a fan of his style. I'm of both the writing and directing style. And it definitely was a fun, almost like an episode of a Superman, TV show. But it many ways did feel like a retread, honestly, of stuff that was done in the Zack Snyder films, but ironically with less depth than the Zack Snyder films did it, which was one of my problems with the Zack Snyder films, is I thought they touched on a lot of great issues but didn't develop them very well. But this one kind of developed them even less. I also had some problems with the portrayals of like characters like Superman and Lex Luthor. Again, like Lex Luthor, as an example, had a lot less depth than even the Jesse Eisenberg version. And the Superman, definitely, like, they tried to make him like so relatable that he's maybe not quite as aspirational. I mean, like, there's certain things where he gets so emotional at certain moments where it's like, I'm not sure I want this guy to have superpowers. Maybe I'm kind of on Lex's side here. With some of his concerns. So it was definitely one of those things where, like, again, I know James Gunn can do depthful, deep emotional stories. I mean, again, he did the Suicide Squad and Guardians, and so there was just less of that. And since I am such a huge Superman fan, I've been waiting for a Superman movie that does live up to what I know he's capable of from the comics. I was somewhat let down, particularly, again, since a lot of the interviews with the cast and directors showed, they really get these characters and can really dig deep into this, so that we can have a Superman movie finally that lives up to what Batman has been able to have with The Dark Knight, even the Batman, for a while. So I didn't get that, and that's what I was hoping for. But as something that's like, it's cool to see Superman on screen kind of being Superman for the most part, it definitely delivered on that score. And I think that's what most people are looking for. I think that my standards are a little bit more weighty than a lot of other people's are, because I've been like, where's my Superman movie I've been waiting my whole life for? I don't think most people are looking for that, so I don't think that most people are going to be as kind of middling on it as I was.
Yeah, and we'll get into the tone and stuff that you were saying. A lot of the quotes and things, like pre-release, the stuff that got me excited was all sort of related to sort of the optimistic tone and some of that. So I want to get into that part of it. But just as a question, as someone who hasn't seen it yet, like, is this thing like 6 movies stuffed into one? Like my one concern with the trailer is it's like, like all this talk about focusing in on who Superman is and stuff. And then you get this trailer and there's like, half a dozen superheroes and monsters. And it's like, whoa, like this is like a TV series, full season trailer. This is not a 2-hour movie. Like, does it feel that way in the movie? Like, because I know that's sort of James Gunn's thing is like all this.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Like the things that people are like concerned about aren't really a problem. Like, the fact that you have a superhero team like also there, is like, oh, what's that about? That's like not a problem. James Gunn does a good job of like saying, no, these people play a particular role in Superman's life, like another way of being a superhero that actually helps you understand why Superman's way of being a superhero is good. And again, like James Gunn has talked about, look, he's got his coworkers as Clark Kent and his coworkers as Superman, and those fit in decently well. I think there is a general problem with how they do rush through emotional beats and character things that it's like, wait, like you should spend more time developing this idea so that we can feel it and experience it. But I don't think that has quite to do with all of the things that are being stuffed in there, but just how he decides to allot that time that he uses.
Yeah, because here's my hot take, which I think I shared before in this podcast, that I like James Gunn as a director. I almost like him more as like just hearing him, sit at his feet and hear him talk about script writing and filmmaking. Like the guy gets it. Like, he understands everything is very purposeful. But like I kind of blame him for like the downward spiral of, I know we're talking about DC stuff, but like of the MCU is like, I feel like Guardians is a great movie, the first one of the best. But I feel like that sort of set the tone for the rest of like, and it's all lots of characters. It's sort of that real kind of goofy. Like I feel like, things like Thor, the later Thors, and some of the silliness and the overstuffing and getting everyone like can kind of be traced to like, hey, everyone loved this movie and it shouldn't have worked and it did, and so let's all be Guardians. And like I feel like from there you sort of lose some of the initial like a bit more grounded.
I would actually push it back further than that. I would say Avengers really did that, and then Guardians was James Gunn taking that formula and doing it even better than Avengers did. And so, but Avengers was what taught Marvel, no, this is the way to go. This is what you should do. So I don't know if I would blame James Gunn. I think that James Gunn just utilized a formula that was already what people were saying everyone should do and did it better than anybody else.
So yeah, he's a product of the yes. But I think it is like the not focusing on like the singular,
right,
the journey, and you sort of have, which is what was my concern about this Superman movie. Last question before we kind of get into the wider stuff about tone and different approaches and stuff is just like, is our new Superman good? Like I know that's always it only works if you have a good Superman. I guess.
So do you mean the actor, the performer?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's good. He's very good. And I think that it's a fascinating thing. Again, he is supposed to be a more relatable Superman, and he does that really well. And I'm very happy with him as a performer. Again, some of my problems with the writing or direction, I think, aren't about the actor, and I think that he's a very good person to play Superman for a very long time.
Okay, yeah, it seems like all the initial buzz and stuff is like none of the issues seem to be with our new Superman. So I am excited. And again, Joseph's review will be up, I'm sure, soon, if it's not already up, to check out. I'll have my review up in the next couple of days. But want to get into a little bit. So like, how does Superman, like as a character, beyond just like this movie, kind of fit into the kind of cultural ecosystem that we have now? How does he fit in? Like, what is like a modern Superman? Because I think like that is being some of the difficulty with getting Superman back on the screen, is that he does sort of seem like a product of a different era, and like it's very optimistic, very hopeful, and like that's not necessarily the world that you see on social media these days. We're more cynical, we more want the dark, the angsty. I think he is traditionally like like he's an ideal more than like a relatable, like I could be Superman. It's sort of like he inspires us to be better. But he doesn't necessarily like reflect us. At least that's, the general consensus it seems.
Sure.
We can relate to Batman because he's angry and he wants justice and he wants to just punch bad guys. We can't necessarily relate to this perfect, which obviously has a lot of like religious implications, I think, as well. But as far as the sort of the tone, because I think part of that kind of discussion and like how he fits in has been the tone, because you have sort of Zack Snyder's kind of version of the character, which is a bit more, I guess, dark, gritty, Zack Snyder-y. I think that gets overblown a bit. I think Man of Steel, I don't know your opinion. I think Man of Steel is a great movie. Like I'm pro Man of Steel. I don't know if that is, if you feel the same way. But I know like that's the fact that we've sort of moved beyond that, and Henry Cavill, and so you sort of have these two it seems like these sort of two diverging paths of sort of that approach, and then like the more bright kind of, quippy, fun, colorful monsters, a little bit more goofy. And there's an article which we'll link in the description, that I on a GQ kind of had a whole feature piece on the movie, and there were several great kind of quotes about this. But there's one related to the tone, where James Gunn sort of talking about taking a different path. He says, I think that oftentimes people can see Superman as Pollyanna. They say, how can we make Superman cool? So if it's in the 90s, they give him a mullet. But the thing is, he's not cool. He's kind. He loves little kids. He wants little kids to like him. I think it's about owning that and being okay with that. It's not trying to like hippify him, And like, I think we're not trying to like draw tension between him and Zack Snyder, but like, I think Zack Snyder tried to make Superman cool. Like he was cool. He was sleek. He was, so you sort of have these like diverging kind of paths and stuff. But either you, Sam or Joseph, what is your initial thoughts to that? Like, the comparison between sort of like, does Superman, should he be more relatable, dark, kind of angsty? Is Superman better as sort of a more optimistic, uncool figure we aspire to? Like, what are some of your initial thoughts just from that quote and just like the tones of these two movies?
Yeah, well, actually, in preparation for today, I went back and at least started Man of Steel last night, and there's some good things about it, and there's some not good things about it. And I think what's interesting is even in Zack Snyder's version, I think he is trying to be that like idealistic, that good Superman, and maybe he was just trying to tell more of like, how does he ultimately become that? So there's all the flashbacks to like growing up and like his earthly fathers preparing him to one day, be this essentially Superman. And so there's some really interesting things that Zack Snyder was doing, along with just, okay, we're throwing freight trains at each other now. Like, I don't know, like that. Once you get into the Zod thing, it just sort of I lose interest and I didn't finish it. Also, it was way past my bedtime. But I think, I think he does need to remain aspirational. And I think, again, I haven't seen the new James Gunn version, but I think even in Zack Snyder's version, he is doing that. Like even his sort of, like when he turns himself in and he's talking to the generals and he's like, I'm doing this, because I'm a good person and I'm trying to do the right thing and I don't need you to like, try and control me because you can't, but I'm doing this for the good of Earth essentially. But I think he's just coming at it from his own way and trying to paint this backstory of how Superman ends up getting there in the end, which I think is really interesting. But it just gets lost, I think, sometimes in the spectacle of Zack Snyderness, of just, it's just interesting, like watching it, because that was 2013, I think, and like the thing that's just so, I guess, 2013 was like the punch in zoom of like fast moving objects across the screen. I don't know if Zack Snyder was the first one to do that, but like I just like there was like dozens of that within like the first 10 minutes of the movie. It's like things flying across the screen, it zooms in a little bit and it's like, oh, it's even faster. And it's just, I don't know, like it just felt very of the time, I guess, that sort of the action-y aspect of it. But I think there's some really good things, even with the Zack Snyder version of it, that I don't like. Yeah, like it's sort of a grittier backstory, but I think it's also setting him up for how he does become the sort of ideal superhero. So I don't know, Joseph, if you have
Yeah,
different
no,
thoughts.
it's all very interesting to me because, as you alluded to, Daniel, Superman has always been very tied to America and what we think of ourselves. So the book, and this leads to also religious, things as well. So the book, the great what was it, the Great Dechurching, talks about how there was a huge association during the kind of 50s and 60s with America and American patriotism and religion and kind of religious patriotism. Like, we're God and country, we love Jesus and we love America because those commies over there, hate God and they hate America and everything we stand for. And so Superman had that same association of like, truth, justice, and mom's apple pie, truth, justice, and American way, and, God and country, all those kind of associations. And as, of course, the 70s kind of became cynical about all those things, became cynical about God and about America and about, family values and like around the same time. And so Superman kind of became, in a sense, a casualty of that. And you see this most explicitly in the 1986 Dark Knight Returns, where, you have this old grizzled Batman who is, Ronald Reagan literally sends Superman to hunt Batman down, and Batman has to fight Superman. And it becomes this symbol of Superman being a corrupt part of an old fake establishment of American values that were always really kind of corrupt at their core. And Batman is this, authentic, dark, true reaction against the fantasy that was Superman represented. And that ethos carried through the 90s and 2000s. Again, remember, our heroes of the 90s were Tyler Durden from Fight Club. They're Neo from The Matrix, where it's like, hey, the fake world, we gotta, rebel against that. And even in the 2000s, again, when Batman had its resurgence, Gotham is America. And who's the Marvel equivalent is Iron Man, who is this bad boy kind of cynic who's rebelling against the establishment all the time. And again, every Marvel movie is about, hey, this is how society that is actually corrupt. And so Superman has this difficulty to deal with of, like you said, he does to everybody represent those things. But like James Gunn says, every time they kind of try to make Superman not that and cool, people reject that also, because it's like, well, we have all these other characters that represent that. Superman, we like him because he's those things, but do we believe in those things anymore? And so again, the era of Zack Snyder, is interesting because, like, you're right, Sam, Superman is actually kind of a aspirational figure in those too. He's basically a good guy who does good things all the time. Sure, he, snaps his off his neck, but like that's only controversial to like comic book fans who know that Superman has like an established rule against killing people. There's no universe in which most people are kind of like, the average person is like, yeah, he's about to kill these people. Like, you got to kill him, That was one of the things I didn't really like about Man of Steel, is that it was saying we're trying to deconstruct Superman a little bit and dig deeper into him. And we also are trying to dig deep into it. What if an alien really did come down, and how would we deal with that? But it doesn't spend any time with the human characters really, so that you can see, well, how does having an alien come change us? How does, how would a real world react to it? Because we don't spend any time in the real world and see how they change and react to that. Now, they try to do that some in the Batman v Superman, but it's mostly just talking heads on the screen. What we don't see is, very much of a Superman that we relate to engaging with these questions deeply, or human characters who are engaging with these questions in a deep way. Again, now Batman v Superman actually does this a little bit better. And it honestly has like a very, I don't know how to put it, a very, kind of religious and simplistic answer to it. Again, Batman says, you got a guy with all this power, and how can we trust him? And that's a very good question. And the answer is just because Superman is good. That's it. Superman is Jesus. And Lex Luthor actually is the one who says, I'm going to expose the fact that nobody who's all good can be all powerful, because that's what I believe about God. And it's like, which is, again, I think is one of the best, villain motivations ever. And of course, the answer is, well, Superman is God. He really just is that perfect, and so that's why you can trust him and should trust him. So there was within Zack Snyder this vibe of we're being deconstructive, but they never actually did deconstruct to the bottom like The Dark Knight did and then build it back up in a positive way. They would just kind of did cheap hand waving away from the issues they addressed. What's interesting, and again, as I actually rewatched all these prior to the Superman also, just so I could actually compare them better. Superman, and I like a lot of the things that Zack Snyder looks like he's kind of trying to do, like with how many you talked about, the kind of the push and pull in. I do kind of like that a lot of these, they try to sometimes make it look like a documentary, like you're watching from a distance these horrific and amazing kind of things happen. That's interesting to me. It's like, okay, yeah, what if this really was happening in the real world? How horrifying would it be or look like? But again, those are moments those are vibes that they're doing. They don't actually really peel back the layers in details. You know, they don't show Clark Kent as a kid watching alien invasion movies and then discovering he's an alien and saying, oh, that's me. Like, I'm E.T., I'm the guys from Independence Day. How do I feel about that? You know, they don't show him attempting to put on the glasses, or his parents teach him how to put on the glasses and slump his shoulders so that people aren't scared of him. You know, those are things that, like, if you're doing a deconstructive idea of Superman that's what you do if you're honestly trying to do that. Now, if you're trying to then say, compare, when you're doing this, comparing it to James Gunn, what's funny is that James Gunn is basically doing the same thing that Zack Snyder did. He has, particularly in Batman v Superman, he has Superman coming in here, and then the talking heads are all saying, can we trust Superman? That's Lex Luthor's whole plan. No, you can't really trust Superman. Trying to manipulate the government and the media and stuff like that to say, no, you can't trust Superman because he's an alien and he's all powerful and all that kind of stuff. It's all that kind of stuff. The difference is the vibe. The difference is that the Zack Snyder world is, let's frame this like a documentary, that we're watching this as a human. And James Gunn frames this as, we're shooting this like a comic book. We're shooting this like, you know, you're with Superman in the fights, in the shots, in much more ways, and it's bright and it's colorful. But the also difference is that you know, Zack Snyder tried, honestly, he made the characters feel unrelatable and unapproachable and stoic, so you didn't emotionally connect with the characters. Here, again, it's talking heads who are saying we can't trust Superman in there. In this one, Lois Lane, in kind of a mock interview with Superman, is asking these questions. And so there's an emotional connection with these questions being asked that's not quite there in the Zack Snyder. And also, you know, the characters are the actors are chosen, the dialogue is delivered so that we're feeling relatable, that we're feeling connection with them while they're doing that. And so I think that's what a lot of people are responding to really positively, is like, oh, I feel connected to these characters, and I feel like I'm in a comic book movie asking these questions rather than in my real world asking these questions. So I can suspend my disbelief a little bit more when the answers that these movies are giving kind of are cop-outs to these issues. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. I do also think that we are in a time period right now that is more susceptible, or more ready to believe in more bright and optimistic vibe and answers with Superman than we were even in the Zack Snyder era, but we can talk about that a little bit more. Oh, I'll just say the one thing, the big difference between Zack Snyder and James Gunn, you can see, is Zack Snyder didn't have the underpants on the outside, and James Gunn does. There's very much a saying of, I aesthetically am going to embrace the comic booky aspects of the character rather than not with this. But again, in substance, they're really not that different.
I mean, yeah, we don't want to diminish. Like, to me, that is the key thing, having the underpants on the outside. Like, I mean, I can relate to that. Like, we've all been there, and I feel like having my perfect superhero.
Literally, this was actually a big debate between me and a friend of mine who does love Man of Steel. And when that movie was coming out, I was like, this does not work aesthetically. It looks like a onesie. You need to break up with color. Even if you just want to have the belt be a giant bright color, you know, red or yellow, you can't have it just look like a onesie. And we just debate this incessantly, which is better. But yeah.
Yeah, I like Superman being a fashion icon of just transcending the. I do think you're right though. Like, I think it at least it feels like, and I mean, at least with the anticipation for this movie, that, like, there is sort of this hunger for the more optimistic. I think a lot of the things that people were excited about, and again, I haven't seen the movie. Hopefully, it delivers some of that. Is that it's sort of like like for me, it's always sort of that question of, the role of a superhero is like, do they sort of pull us up, or do we sort of pull them down? Like, do we, in order to engage with them, are they like up in the clouds and they inspire us to, move that direction? Or do we sort of pull them down and it's like, well, they're superhero, but they're also super flawed like we are, and they're relatable, and they make mistakes, and they're angry, and like they, it's like, how do we deal with these? And it feels like a lot of recent stuff has been kind of pulling the superhero down to, hey, we can relate to them because, and I think there's good things with that approach too. I don't think that's a wrong or like an anti-Christian approach or anything, but I feel like we have lost a bit of the, like, you know what, like, we can't necessarily relate because we're not perfect, but they can inspire us to, to sort of move towards that. And kind of, and you sort of led into it, Joseph, of just sort of like how they fit into sort of our culture. And like, I think they, like how much do they, like, I think sort of that same individual thing of pulling them up or down, but like in a cultural way of like, do they reflect our culture? Do they set the, the bar for a culture to strive towards beyond? And because I think like, one of the interesting things with kind of related to that was like just like sort of the slogan of Superman back in, it was always, truth, justice, and the American way, which is, definitely a product sort of that time. And that's this sort of the classic thing. And then like in 2001, there was sort of pushback and some of that, and, kind of rebranding of get a new marketing department. And it was truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Kind of this idea that like, hey, Superman doesn't, he doesn't really represent America as today. He needs to sort of reflect a different America, or a more global world, and not America at all. And he's not, he's an alien, and he's, more up universal things. And I think you see that play out, sort of that conversation, that debate, with a lot of like the discussion surrounding this film, like of sort of how much should Superman sort of reflect America, like contemporary, current hot button issues? How much is he sort of more an archetype that is universal and doesn't, isn't reacting to the current things? And there were two quotes, and then we can kind of get into, want to hear you guys' thoughts on some of that. Going back to the GQ article, there was a quote that sort of unpacked a bit of that. It says, in a landscape where cynicism, satire, and sarcasm rule, where even Perry Mason gets a gritty reboot, an earnest hero whose motto is truth, justice, and the American way seems, especially at this particular stage of the country's history, woefully outdated. So you either reshape Superman to fit today's times, potentially compromising what makes him Superman to begin with, or wrestle with an adaptation that feels blatantly out of set with the zeitgeist. Gunn found a third way, craft an alternative universe that bears strong similarities to ours, where Superman's optimism and morals set a standard to strive for. So kind of setting up those two, does he reflect America? Is he sort of more what America should be? And I'll throw in two, and then we can get into it, because in some ways this sort of goes against what that article is saying. Sort of the controversy that seems to be surrounding this movie is James Gunn had a quote in an interview with the Times of London, where he says, I mean, Superman is the story of America, an immigrant that came from other places and populated the country. But for me, it's mostly a story that says basic human kindness is a value and is something we have lost. And I think later in the article, or in that interview, or earlier, he kind of says that it is very political. Like it is, he is an immigrant. Immigration is sort of the big cultural conversation going on right now. So in some sense, it's like, hey, there's an alternate universe, and he's this optimistic ideal. In other ways, he's sort of saying, hey, but he does reflect sort of the story of us right now. For either of you guys, like, what do you take of like of that quote, sort of the controversial immigration thing, but also just sort of in a larger step back sense of just sort of, does he represent us, or is it more he sets sort of the North Star that we strive toward?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many landmines and just complicating factors within that. I mean, first of all, it would be, so what is the American way? And, can America agree on the American way? And I think the sort of throwback American way, I think people kind of have an aversion to, and I think by that maybe it's just sort of like, you know, more like family values and God, maybe, and lots of money. Uh, maybe that's sort of from the 50s, but I think in some ways he should set the ideal for the American way, and I think that American way is that you can live in a society in which you can be the very best version of you, so long as you're, um, not tearing other people down, and so long as you're like you are building for a better tomorrow, because I think that is like a better tomorrow is, I think, sort of the ethos of America. I mean, if you from the founding to today, and if you look at all of the great companies that have come out of America and all the great art and all the great um, pop culture that has come out of America, um, I think it is very much an aspiration to live up to. And I think it is like, I think we can agree on those things, but I think it gets so sort of muddied, I think, in politics today that it's I think people are at odds when they don't necessarily need to be. I think just because of like definitionally, like I think people sort of just get all worked up about one thing or the other, or what exactly do you mean by this, or like, are we a nation of immigrants or not? It's like, well, yeah, we obviously are a nation of immigrants, but it's like that doesn't mean that like we have no border or these sort of things, right? So it's like and so you get all these unnecessarily simplistic and not nuanced conversations about what it means to be American and what sort of what Superman could and should represent. I think the very best parts of it. Um, and so I think it can just be a little hairy sometimes, I think, to try and dive into that. But yeah, I mean, I think he can set the ideal, and I think he can, and I think it can be tied to America, because I do think, like, if you look at the flow of, of foot traffic, it's still flowing into America. Like, if you look at all the countries around the world, most of the people in the other countries, if you could go anywhere, where would you go? It would be America. And I think that's something that is still very powerful. And the ideals of America, I think, are still sort of guiding the world in many ways. And again, not perfectly and not without problems and all the rest of it. But I think that that can still be something that Superman can sort of represent and people can get behind without necessarily getting tangled up in all the more political aspects of it. Joseph, I don't know. You can
Yeah, no,
you can disagree with me if you want
no, no,
to.
no. I don't largely disagree with anything that you said. I think it is interesting. Again, talk about like sort of Superman's relevance. I was realizing, again, we had Superman movies for a long time, but really the culturally powerful image that we've had in our head of has not been Superman during these years. It's been the evil Superman characters. So we've had Homelander, we've had the Invincible's father, this parody of Superman. We've had even the Injustice Superman where he goes evil and is doing it. And that's been kind of our idea of this powerful person who's evil. And the boys show has been, look at these American values that were being propped up. It's really just hiding the cynical corporate evil, horrible Homelander character. And, you talk about like whether or not Superman is relevant sort of today, and you look at these sort of political aspects of it. I think that there's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. And some of it is very specifically political because, one of the things, actually, it's kind of funny because one of the things that the Superman movie does comment on, which I think is very clever, is the media's incessant interest in making things political that don't have to be. And of course, you have these press people, and I kind of am annoyed with them trying to get a political headline out of James Gunn when he clearly doesn't want to. Again, you're looking at the red carpet for the Superman premiere, and these people are constantly trying to ask the actors and James Gunn, hey, let's talk about politics. And James Gunn really doesn't want to talk about it, but he also wants to be honest and authentic. And so they're really doing exactly what the movie is saying that the media landscape in the movie is trying to do. And James Gunn, I mean, he gave a very, good answer, and it shouldn't be political. I mean, he said, look, Superman is an immigrant story, and it is, it literally is. It's a story about, and it was also made by, two Jewish, boys who, they were immigrants, their parents were immigrants. I forget the exact, but it is about what does it mean to assimilate to America. I had an interview with the author of Is Superman Circumcised, who was talking about the Jewish heritage of Superman. And he was talking about, again, it's very much the story about Jewish immigration to America. It's very much a story about everybody's, again, I'm, my had Irish-Polish background. It's like those people, their immigration to America, you changed your last name oftentimes, just like he does with Clark Kent. It's like, okay, my alien heritage versus my human heritage. And that's one of the reasons that I really like the whole truth, justice, the American way thing, because it's being honest about what the metaphors of Superman are about. It's about the American way is that there is both immigration and assimilation. And Superman, and that's okay, and that a good thing to aspire to is, like you said, Sam, I really like this, make a better life for yourself as long as you're not hurting other people. And what does Superman do? I've had this, in my own sort of deconstructive Superman fan fiction, which maybe I'll release at some point. I'm sort of more inspired to do it now that I'm sort of dissatisfied with what everybody else is doing. But is the idea that Superman doesn't save lives, he extends them. He really just protects people from killing each other and then lets them do their own thing. And honestly, that's the American way. That's the Enlightenment values of, hey, let's, with John Locke being, hey, maybe let's not do religious wars where we impose our religious beliefs on other people. Maybe let's just have freedom of association to take care of that and make laws around don't kill each other and take each other's stuff. And maybe that's a better world. And that's literally what Superman represents. To say that he represents, the universal way was one thing that's in 2013 they tried to do. I represent universal values. And I remember I had this fight on Twitter with a friend of mine. We were talking about Christian nationalism, and again, I don't like Christian nationalism, but the person, my friend, was saying we shouldn't impose Christian beliefs on other people. We should, only make laws about universal values. And I said, my dear sister in Christ, you are a feminist. Those values are not even universal in this country. Yeah. And it's like, no. And so the fact that Superman does represent a set of values that are controversial around the world and that we think as Americans those are good things are things I think that Superman as a character should own. And one of the things that, and actually that kind of makes him kind of controversial and edgy. The problem is, and I'm not going to get, I don't mean this in a partisan or mean way. One of the things is that there is a political aspect to this, which is that the kind of values that Superman does represent that are sort of the American values, it's like, immigration plus assimilation. I like God. I like, a sort of traditional monogamous relationship with Lois Lane. I'm patriotic, kind of, I like my country, kind of like you're around. Those are right-wing coded things today. And I don't mean that in a kind of, in a mean way. I mean, there was just a poll that was taken about, like, do you think America is a good place? Are you patriotic? Do you feel patriotic? And it found that conservatives feel that way all the time, and liberals feel like that when their president is in power. And even then, they feel that less than other times. And of course, now, again, being in favor of marriage and family and religion is becoming a right-wing coded thing, again, which it shouldn't be, but it is. And so the problem that Superman has faced for a long time is the people who are positive towards the things that Superman is coded towards aren't making his movies or writing his comic books. The people who think that Superman is outdated are people who are writing him, and sort of are part of the half of the country that is more cynical about those things. And so, again, it's for most people, the things that Superman represents, or for like, half the country, but even like more than half the country, things that Superman represents are not super controversial. They're kind of normal, normie stuff, but they are cynical for and a little bit problematic for the half of the country that's writing Superman, and they have trouble writing him. And what James Gunn is kind of sort of trying to do with Superman is trying to say, okay, that's okay to do, to embrace who Superman is, while still being, while still, and to do that though, he has to put it in kind of an alternate reality. I think is an interesting thing, because it's hard to do it kind of in our reality where it does get into this issue of, how do I feel about real people being in power this way, and having this kind of power. And I think that that's a fascinating aspect to this conversation. But also this, I will say this, is that for a lot of people, certain things, and I like that James Gunn is saying this, because I really I'm impressed with him for saying this. And I'm sort of disappointed against with people on the left and the right, particularly people on the right, who take the bait and think he's being political. But the point he's making is things like kindness are becoming politically coded. Like when people on the left say kindness, they mean kindness that has to involve our particular political solutions, like you were saying, Sam, earlier. Mm-hmm. And the right is hearing kindness and empathy, and they're saying, oh, that just means liberalism. It just means woke. And James Gunn is trying to say, no, kindness is just a good thing. It's deeper than politics. But now we have both the right and the left saying, oh, he's talking about kindness, he's talking about empathy. Well, that's a liberal thing. And there's both sides are kind of involved in that being a problem. But I'm hopeful that there are aspects, again, there are aspects of this movie that do get political and very explicitly political. It's hard to avoid looking at them that way. But I'm also hopeful that to a certain degree, you can look at Superman and say, no, he really, end of this movie, you can't overlook those things with this movie. That you can say, these aren't, even if the people who are making these movies think these are political values, these are values that actually do transcend politics, and that's a good thing.
Well, and I think just watching the Zack Snyder one in preparation for today, it's interesting to me how strong a role his earthly parents play. And it's like, really, who Superman is a result of that good parenting, basically. And it's like, these are the American values that we're instilling in Superman, and he happens to be invincible. And so it's like, it's a good thing that he had the parents he did. So you could make the whole argument, like, it's actually about... Yeah,
well, actually, I have to say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I would say, like, I don't want to spoil this movie, but that aspect of that, it's the American values that and the people he was raised by on Earth that make Superman Superman, more than his even Kryptonian heritage. That is even stronger in this one than it was in the Zack Snyder. And in certain ways I haven't heard people talk about, you could almost argue it's explicitly anti-woke, which I got James Gunn didn't mean, way of going about this. I haven't heard anybody say that yet. I'm interested in seeing if somebody takes that and is like, oh, this is a very you could almost make that one part of it is kind of MAGA coded, but I'll let people watch the movie itself.
Yeah,
and I do think that's like, I mean, that's what makes, for those that, Superman's for kids kind of mindset of like, I feel like it's, what you guys, both you and Joseph and Sam, like, I feel like that's why it's not like there's so much. That's why I think like a character like Superman is so like just essential to our culture, like to understanding our culture, understanding like it is sort of a mirror in some ways, which I feel like why it's always going to be unavoidable. Like you have yes, it's sort of this, this ideal up in the beyond us that we look to, but I feel like what that reflects about us and how we embrace that is, I think, by necessity gonna be different from different people and divisive, and like, the values, like all those things that he represents, there is sort of that political aspect. And I mean, I'm with you. Like I've always said, I just don't care what people say on a red carpet. Like to me, that's, like, because this came up a lot with like the Snow White movie, yeah. Their live action remake, and it's like, what, like, to me, it makes no difference what the actress is saying. Like, show me the movie, and then I'll judge that, and I'll see if that's actually coming through. Like, it doesn't matter to me what the outside. But there is sort of this like ownership aspect of like everyone wants Superman to represent them because And I think in some ways there is something deeply American about that. Like sort of this ownership of, hey, we are, he is sort of our champion and he represents our way of life. And it sort of has these, all the debate and stuff that comes, which I think when done in a healthy manner is a very American thing. Maybe kind of last thing for us just to touch on is just sort of I guess, because you've touched on it already, Joseph, is just like the religious aspect of this. Because like there has sort of been, I mean, like Superman, there's, a lot of parallels. He sort of is Jesus in many ways in his age and is what he represents. And at least that's how he has been taken, as sort of this representative, that our savior from, another place that comes and protects us and all that kind of stuff. How do you sort of see, like, the character today, and especially like with this movie, like what does that reflect just about sort of where we are religiously? Like, because I think you might have mentioned it, Joseph, that if you look like, outside of superheroes and just like Gen Z and stuff, like there is sort of seems like an increasing like openness to religion. A lot of Gen Z young men are coming back to church, and there sort of is this like, hey, you know what, maybe sort of this perfect figure and this this being that's we can follow after, and like, maybe that's not a bad thing. Like maybe we actually want that and not just Batman as someone to like fight our earthly justice for us or whatever. Like where do you sort of see that? Like, is there anything to that? Is that reading too much into it, or is there a sense that like we're sort of the reason Superman's finally coming back and in this form has something to do with just sort of where we are as a culture and what we're kind of yearning for?
Yeah, I think that there is, and I'm trying to figure out. I mean, there's a lot of pieces to this, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Superman and Christianity have fallen and risen together. It's not a coincidence that when we're again, the great de-churching book talked about how we really associated God and country in the 50s and 60s, and we became cynical about all those things at the same time. 2 years after The Dark Knight Returns came out, The Last Temptation of Christ came out. And there's a turning point of how we portray Jesus on screen. And that was rebellious against the Christian establishment and deconstructive of that in the same way that Dark Knight Returns was deconstructive of Superman. And, Superman's popularity falling even as, the nuns are rising and Christianity is losing. And now there's more openness and excitement around religion and faith. Now then, again, there's a lot of articles like, intellectuals are turning back to God. There's, men are outnumbering women in church, which again, technically it's interesting. There's a lot of nuance to this, but a lot of the most popular online figures, are at least friendly toward religion, if not more so. And, people are talking about a religious revival. That seems to be true more in Europe than it is in America. Technically Gen Z does not seem to be more religious than less religious. What people are sort of talking about when they talk about the religious revival, and I've talked about this, is the fact that religion is now becoming male coded rather than female coded. And typically male coded things and environments tend to grow, whereas female coded environments where there's majority female tend to have the problem of male flight, where men just kind of leave those environments. And so there's this optimism that as sort of, religion becomes male coded and it becomes popular, then it's going to have a rise in society. And we're seeing the same thing online with Superman, is that like, oh, this character who represents all these things that we like, where it's like, and we actually like God and country and, and family values and things like that. These are, again, now becoming sort of right-wing coded things, but also male coded things. And since that kind of is dominating the online space, it's the online world is seeming to feel like, oh, we're really excited about both these things at the same time. And I think that that's sort of the ticket, is that because Superman is so tied to these things and has been for his entire history, it would make sense that these things are all rising and falling together. People are like, I like the world that Superman represents and the values he represents. And part of those includes a disposition toward God. And so now I'm more open to both of these things and able to be excited about both of these things. And yeah, I think that I'll be interested in seeing where it goes from here. You know, do the religious institutions, you know, are they able to capture all these people who are interested in these ideas and nurture them and disciple them in a way that lasts beyond this cycle that we're in? And I think, are the caretakers of Superman able to make movies and content that sort of captures that next generation to be excited about the character as well? That I don't know, but I think it's clear that the zeitgeist is, maybe we've lost something that was actually good, and maybe it's worth going back to that and retrieving that. You know, again, I've written about this before, that it's not a coincidence that the Make America Great Again moniker was so popular and had such a powerful capture on the American imagination. So everybody is remembering it, even if you don't like it, because it's the same thing that Aaron Sorkin wrote, the famous liberal, in Newsroom. He's like, you know, America's not the greatest country in the world, but we sure used to be. You know, there is that same, whether it's the right or the left, this zeitgeist that we're in, religious, non-religious, where we're like, there's something we lost and we want to recapture it. And Superman and God are both the beneficiaries of that. And the only question is what the future is going to bring. And will this Superman movie, will the church leaders be able to nurture that further, or will it die out till the next cycle?
Yeah, because there is, and again, you can overly simplify too, and like draw too many conclusions. But like, I do think there is a sense that like sort of how people respond to the character of Superman reflects sort of how people respond to Jesus, like to this, you know, where he is other than us, but he did also come down to us, and he's sort of one of us, but he's not one of us, and sort of how do we feel? Because even like, what comes to mind is like the popular the He Gets Us Jesus ad campaign, which I've spoken kind of against in different capacities, but sort of that sense that like, you know, Jesus he's just one of us, like he's, you know, you sort of lose the otherness that like, well, he is like, he's among us, he came down to earth, but like, you know, he's currently up, you know, sitting on the right hand side of, you know, the Father. Like he's different though, like he's not just sort of, you know, a human, which is why I think like a character, even more than other superhero, like I think all superheroes they reflect different things about us, and there's values, but there's this thing about sort of the otherness of sort of Superman that is sort of inherently religious in a sense, and like does more naturally kind of bring to those, whether you respond positively or negatively, or try and make him more earthly or lesser, like there is something deeply religious, which I think like for Christians, like I know a lot of, there's already been sort of in response to the James Gunn stuff, you know, James Gunn is woke, we just need to avoid it, and, you know, boycott the movie. And like why I find like all of that just so unhelpful is like this is a conversation for Christians to be involved in. Like this is a conversation that is very naturally bent towards understanding how the culture views religion and Jesus, and you know, not perfectly, but at least the seeds of those conversations that like, you know, we need to be involved in sort of that conversation. So looking forward to, like I said, Joseph's review, if it's not already out, it will be probably out by the time this podcast airs, as will my review. So check out both, and then see who got it right and who got it wrong. Pit us against each, like a Batman Superman style. But one thing which I know will be right, although I'm curious if this will be sort of the more gritty, relatable, or will be more the idealistic, optimistic, something to strive towards, is the final segment of this podcast, which is things we like that you should like too. So Joseph, we have you on the podcast again, so we will cede the floor, because I know you like a lot of things. You're an optimistic, happy guy. So why don't you share one thing that you feel like the masses should join you in liking?
So I'm going to do a couple brief things. They're both Superman graphic novels that I think if people are interested in Superman, they should definitely check out. It's Superman for All Seasons and Superman Last Son of Krypton. They're both graphic novel trade paperbacks. The first is about Superman's early days, sort of like this movie is doing, where he's growing up on a farm, and then also his first times Metropolis and figuring out who he is and what kind of superhero he wants to be. I think it's one of the most beautiful. It was what one of the things that made me a huge Superman fan when I was growing up. It's got beautiful Norman Rockwell style artwork by Tim Sale and beautiful prose and characterization by Jeff Loeb. So I definitely recommend people, if they were going to want to pick up one Superman book, they do, to know who the character is and why they should love him, they should do that. And then, of course, Superman Last Son of Krypton is a collection of Jeff Johns and other artists' take on the character, where it's him much later. He's married to Lois Lane, and he's, also wrestling with fighting. And where the first one has him fighting Luthor, this one has him fighting Zod and Brainiac, and a much more kind of like, what is Superman as an older man, and how does he wrestle with other sides of himself? I think those are kind of like the two best graphic novel takes on the character that I've seen, that I recommend that people engage with if they want to read really great Superman stuff. And if they want to watch something, Superman versus the Elite is one of my favorite Superman piece of content, where again, it's wrestling with Superman versus his critics is in one of the better versions of that.
Nice.
Yeah, well, that's helpful, because the thing that's always kept me from like going deep into the comics is like, I just find it so daunting. Like there's so much of it that and I'm kind of like like an OCD, where like I want, start me on book one and I'll trudge through and get to whatever the last one is, but which is just sort of, the world of comics that I just like, I feel like I'm too ignorant of some of it to know where to sort of, hey, this is sort of an arc or a story that you can experience. Like I can walk into a comic book store and it's like, anxiety attack. So yeah, we'll link those below if you want to check out, where to dip their toes into the little Superman on the page. And again, encourage everyone to go check out Superman on the Screen. Again, I haven't not seen it. Joseph gave a middling review, so I look forward to actually checking out your review and seeing what you thought. But thanks, Joseph, so much. Where can if people want to follow your work, find your reviews, find your articles, your podcast, all that stuff? Like, where can people kind of follow and join that conversation?
Yeah, so I'm on all the socials. I'm most active on X at normalguy8, but you can also just check Joseph Holmes. I'm also, you can go to my website, josephholmesstudios.com, where I have links to all of the places where you can find all my articles, most regularly at Religion Unplugged, but I also write for World Magazine quite a bit and other outlets. And you can also check me out on the Overthinkers. We have the overthinkersjournal.world is our website, and the podcast is the Overthinkers. Me and my co-host Nathan Clarkson, who's a filmmaker and author and an actor, we talk about culture, art, faith, and philosophy, and whatever tickles our fancy every week, and we have a lot of fun. So you should definitely check that out too. We have a lot of great guests. We just had on, as our latest episode, is Sean Gaffney, who's a filmmaker, writer, and film professor, and we talked about why do we love superheroes and dig deep into that. And there's a lot of discussion about Marvel versus Zack Snyder's version of superheroes, and a lot of really cool, interesting, deep stuff. And so that was a really fun episode to do. So if you enjoyed this episode, you should definitely check that out as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, you guys have a great thing going with your podcast. And we actually, for fans of our podcast, we have Sean on next episode. We recorded
awesome.
a great, he's a great guy and a great conversation. But for sure, everyone, check out Joseph's work, follow all the stuff that he's doing, check out their podcast, and hopefully you can also find him from time to time on The Collision. We keep trying to pull him in.
Yes, that's right. I do write for The Collision too. Yeah, that's true.
I know that's sort of the top byline that he has, and then he filters in all that.
Everyone already knows that, obviously. So, yeah.
It goes without saying.
Yes.
But for the rest of you, we hope that you will join us next week, every Thursday, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.